On a Monday morning, the biggest tech IPO of the year starts trading, a company everyone's heard of, going public at a price tag that breaks records. And somewhere in the first few minutes, the price is going to jump, maybe a lot. The moment it does, millions of people are going to take that jump as proof they need to get in before it's too late. Here's the problem with that instinct. A few years back, one of the most hyped IPOs in recent memory opened up over 20%. Within a year, it had fallen more than 60%. Another company that same year opened down, looked like a flop, and within a year had climbed over 100%. The first day told you nothing, in both cases. So before you let opening day decide anything for you, let's do the math everyone skips. Let me be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This isn't a video about this company being bad. By almost any measure, it's an extraordinary business. It dominates its space, it's growing fast, it has real customers, real revenue, real technology. So if you're here hoping someone tells you the company is a fraud, that's not what this is. This is about something different, and in a way more important. The difference between a great company and a great investment at a given price on a given day. Those are not the same thing. And the gap between them is exactly where ordinary investors lose money on deals like this. Here's the part most people never see. An IPO isn't a single event where everyone shows up and buys at the same price. It's a sequence. A machine built in a very specific order. And the people who design that machine sit at the front of the line. By the time you, sitting at home, are able to click buy, several groups have already taken their positions ahead of you. Most of the day one excitement is engineered to make you forget that. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through that machine, one stage at a time. We'll look at what you'd actually be buying, what the price really is, compared to the business underneath it, who got the good seats and who didn't, what history says tends to happen next, and the wave most retail buyers never see coming. By the end, you won't need me to tell you what to do. You'll be able to run the numbers yourself. Let's build this from the ground up, because every part that follows depends on it. A company like this has been private for years. That means its shares are owned by a relatively small group, founders, employees, and the investment firms that funded it along the way. You couldn't buy those shares in your brokerage account no matter how much you wanted to. An initial public offering, an IPO, is the moment that changes. The company sells a slice of itself to the public for the first time. And from then on, its shares trade on an exchange where anyone can buy and sell. Now here's the piece that matters most. The piece that gets glossed over in all the excitement. There are actually two different prices involved, not one. The first is called the IPO price. This is the price set before the stock ever trades, negotiated between the company and the big banks running the deal. The shares sold at that price go almost entirely to large institutions and a limited pool of insiders. The second price is the one you'll probably actually pay. When the stock opens for public trading, it opens at whatever buyers and sellers agree to in the open market. And for a deal this hyped, that opening price is almost always higher, sometimes much higher than the IPO price. Hold on to that gap between the two prices. It's going to matter more than almost anything else. And we'll come back to exactly who profits from it. Before we talk about whether the price makes sense, we have to be honest about what's underneath it. So let's look at the actual business. Let's say, for the sake of this example, the company brought in around $18 billion in revenue last year. That's a serious, large business. But here's the first thing the headlines don't lead with. In that same year, the company didn't make a profit. It lost several $billion. Now, where does that revenue actually come from? This surprises a lot of people. Often, the part of the business everyone associates with the brand isn't actually the part making money. There's usually one division, one product line, one service. That's quietly carrying the entire company on its back, generating most of the revenue and almost all of the profit. Meanwhile, the flashier divisions, the ones in all the headlines, the ones the company is betting its future on, are often still burning cash. So when you buy a share of a company like this, you're really buying one profitable engine towing several heavier, money-losing cars behind it. There's a reasonable case that those other cars become valuable someday, but someday is doing a lot of work in that sentence. And as we're about to see, the price is being set as if someday is already here. Now we can finally talk about the valuation. I want to show it to you in a way that the breathless coverage won't. Most coverage will tell you the company is going public at a valuation north of $1 trillion and let the sheer size of that number do the talking. That's impressive. But it's not the most revealing part. The most revealing part is how fast that number got there. Rewind less than a year. In a private sale of its own shares not long ago, this company was valued at a fraction of where it's debuting now. By the time it goes public, that figure has multiplied several times over. So you'd expect the business underneath to have grown enormously in that time, right? It didn't. Revenue grew, but nowhere near that fast. What got dramatically more expensive wasn't the business. It was the story. Let me put the final price in terms you can actually judge. Take the valuation. Divide it by the revenue. For a business like this, on a deal this hyped, that ratio often lands somewhere between 70 and 100 times revenue. To give you a sense of how steep that is, most large, established, profitable companies trade somewhere in the low single digits to low double digits on that same measure. Even the market's most beloved high flyers rarely sustain anything close to 70, let alone 100. And this isn't just one person's opinion. Independent research firms that specialize in private market valuations regularly publish estimates for companies like this before they go public. And those estimates often come in significantly below, sometimes 40 or 50% below, the price the company ultimately debuts at. Notice something about that. The independent estimate tends to land close to what the company was privately valued at just months earlier. In other words, the entire run-up often happens in the window right before the public is invited in. Here's one more way to feel how stretched this can get. Take that one profitable division we talked about earlier. Suppose you valued its profit generously, the way investors price a thriving growing business, say 40 times its earnings. For a division generating a few $1 billion a year in profit, that gives you a value in the tens of billions. The whole company is being sold to you for over $1 trillion. So the profitable core might explain only a fraction of the price. The rest is a bet on things that haven't happened yet. So if the price is that stretched, why does it keep climbing on day one? To answer that, you have to understand the order people stand in, because it's a relay race. And you're not the first runner, you're the last. Picture the IPO price as the starting line. The runners who get to start there are the big institutions, and the insiders, the banks, hand shares to before trading opens. They lock in their position at that price, quietly, days ahead of time. That's the front of the line. Now, some deals like this one make a show of being different. They'll set aside a meaningful slice of the offering for everyday retail investors through popular brokerage apps. That sounds generous. Be careful. Generosity is rarely the explanation when Wall Street widens the door. Because here's what happens to most people, regardless. Even with a larger retail slice, demand for a deal this famous wildly outstrips the shares available. Most people who want in won't get an allocation at the IPO price. So when the stock opens for trading and they still want it, they do the only thing they can. They buy on the open market at the popped-up price. And who's standing on the other side of that trade, ready to sell to them? Often the very people who got the cheap seats at the starting line. That's the relay. The baton, the risk gets passed from the people who bought low to the people who show up late and buy high. The pop everyone celebrates on day one isn't proof the stock is great. Mechanically, it's just the sound of the baton changing hands. And the person holding it at the end of the race is the one standing in their living room, tapping buy on their phone, convinced they got in early. They didn't. They got in last. Okay, you've seen the price and you've seen the order. Now let's talk about what actually tends to happen after a debut like this. Because there's a trap here that's more clever than the stock simply going down. Here's the setup most people miss. There's a rule that can force a wave of automatic buying into a stock like this shortly after it lists. Big index funds, the kind sitting inside millions of retirement accounts, can be required to buy a newly public company once it qualifies for inclusion, whether they think it's a good price or not. That forced buying can actually push the price up in the first days and weeks. Think about what that means for you specifically. If you hold an index fund inside a retirement account, and most people watching this do, you may end up owning a sliver of this company automatically at whatever inflated price the market has set, without ever deciding to. The choice gets made for you, and it gets made at the top. And it gets worse, because that artificial lift is precisely the elevated price that insiders are waiting to sell into. The propped up price isn't a floor protecting you. It's a launch ramp for the people getting out. It creates the exit, and you're the one providing it. Underneath that propped up price, the historical record is sobering. Research on the broader life cycle of public offerings has found that the large majority of newly listed companies eventually trade below their first day low at some point. Not their high, their low. The large majority eventually dip beneath the worst price of their opening day. Which brings us back to where we started this whole video. That hot IPO that opened up over 20% and then fell more than 60% within a year. That other one that opened down, looked like a flop, and then climbed over 100%. The lesson isn't that stocks always fall. The lesson is sharper than that. The first day tells you nothing. The excitement you'll feel watching this stock pop on opening day is not information. It feels like information. It feels like confirmation. But the data says a strong open and a weak open are equally likely to reverse, and noise is the one thing you should never hand your money to. There's one more stage to this machine, and it's one that catches retail investors most reliably because it's printed in plain sight months ahead of time, and people still get blindsided by it. When a company goes public, the insiders, employees, early investors usually can't sell their shares right away. They're locked up for a period, often around 6 months. The reason is simple. If everyone who owned cheap shares could dump them on day one, the price would collapse instantly. The lockup holds that flood back. But here's the thing about a dam. The water doesn't disappear. It just waits. And when the lockup lifts, that held back supply can come pouring into the market all at once, pushing the price down. Often right around the time the early hype has faded, and there are fewer eager buyers left to absorb it. Some deals are structured with multiple lockup expirations, staggered over time rather than just one. A chunk of shares freed up shortly after the first quarterly report as a public company, another batch after that, and a larger remaining block around the standard timeline. Founders often agree to hold their own stake longer than everyone else, which sounds reassuring until you realize everyone else isn't on that schedule. And notice the cruelty of the timing. These releases tend to arrive right as the opening excitement is wearing off, when the headlines have moved on and the crowd of eager buyers has thinned. Fresh supply meets fading demand. That combination is exactly what pushes a price down. And it's arriving on a schedule the insiders could read in advance, and most buyers never will. So picture the calendar. Not one wave, several, spaced out, each one a fresh batch of insiders finally allowed to cash out, and each time the buyers absorbing that supply are once again ordinary investors who got excited and bought in. Exit liquidity. That's the unglamorous term for what the latecomer becomes. Let's bring this all together with the only question that really matters. Forget predicting the stock. Nobody, not me, not the analysts, not the loudest person in your group chat, knows what this stock will do next month. So instead of guessing the outcome, let's measure the bet. Let's ask, what would this company actually have to achieve just to make buying at this price worth it? And to keep it fair, let's set the bar as low as we honestly can. Forget getting rich. Let's just ask what it takes to match what you'd have earned doing the boring, lazy thing. Buying a plain index fund and forgetting about it. Call that around 10% a year. Start at the $1 trillion plus price. To grow at 10% a year for 10 years, this company would need to roughly triple or quadruple in total value. A decade from now. Fine. Now, what does the business have to look like to justify that? Let's be generous and assume that by then it's a mature, admired company trading at a multiple of its sales richer than most blue chips ever earn. Even with that generous assumption, The math demands the company pull in revenue many times larger than what it generates today, often somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 times current revenue. Sit with that for a second. To get there in 10 years, a company would need to grow its revenue around 35 to 40% every single year, for 10 years straight, without stumbling once. Almost no company at this scale in history has ever done that. To put that in perspective, that's faster, for longer, than almost any technology giant you can name managed in its single best decade, and it would have to do it starting from a base that's already enormous, not from a garage. And remember, that result is what's required just to tie the index fund, just to break even against doing nothing. For you to actually come out ahead, reality has to beat even that. So the honest conclusion isn't that this company will fail. It's that at this price, you're not buying a great company at a fair price. You're paying upfront for a near miracle and getting the index fund's return only if that miracle fully arrives. So where does that leave you if you're genuinely drawn to a company like this? Because the price is steep. It's not the same as never touch it. There's a smarter path than the two loud options. The first loud option is to chase the hype. Buy on day one at the popped price, at the end of the relay, right before the supply waves. We've now seen, step by step, why that's the weakest seat in the house. The second loud option is to dismiss the whole thing forever, which throws out a genuinely remarkable business on principle. The third path is quieter, and it costs you nothing but patience. You let time do the work that hype is trying to rush you past. A few months from now, a company like this will have reported real results as a public company, actual numbers on the record that you can hold it to. The forced index buying will have run its course. The first waves of insider selling will have washed through. The price will have had a chance to find a level that reflects the business instead of the excitement. None of that requires you to predict anything. It just requires you to not be in a hurry. And here's the part worth remembering. The best companies of the last few decades stayed buyable for years. You did not have to own them on day one to do extraordinarily well. The market rewards the patient far more reliably than it rewards the early. The thing being sold to you as a once-in-a-lifetime, act-now moment is almost always a stock that will still be there next quarter, at a price set by reality instead of by a countdown clock. The single most powerful thing in this entire video wasn't any one fact. It was the question we asked in that last section. Not what will it do, but what would it have to do to be worth it? That question works on any stock you'll ever consider, not just this one. Before you let any opening day chart make the decision for you, run that question yourself. Take the price, take the revenue, take your own goals, and work backwards. See what growth that price is quietly demanding, because that's the difference between paying for a business and paying for a story. The number on the screen on opening day will be loud. The countdown will feel urgent. None of it changes the quiet math we just did. Great company, extraordinary story, but a price that's already written a miracle into the script. Watch the open if you like. Just don't mistake the noise for a reason. I'll see you in the next one.